I talked last video about, that was a very Canadian, about. Welcome to Good Knits, everyone. I'm Sherry. I am a Canadian living in Amsterdam, knitting in Amsterdam, where I have been for the last 7 years with my husband. On today's episode, I've got 2 finished objects, one of which has been a long time in the making. It was on my needles for approximately 15 months, so very excited to unveil that today. And I also have 3 works in progress, one of which is brand new to you guys. So it's gonna be a big episode. I expect this might be a bit long, so let's just get started. Today, I have lots of exciting stuff to share. One thing actually is I went on a knitting date this past weekend. So one of my old coworkers, she moved to Middelburg a few years ago, which is more in the south of the Netherlands, and it's about 3 hours away from Amsterdam. And I haven't seen her since she left. And so she took up knitting during her maternity leave, and I decided, you know, I'm trying to make more knitting friends in person. That was one of my intentions for the year. And also just I'm really trying to lean into the friends and the friendships that are putting an effort and really trying to keep those connections going. So I decided to take the train, spend a night, and just have a knitting date with her, and also just a catch up in general. And it was so nice. We had the best weather on Saturday, which never happens in the Netherlands. So that was really nice. I got a ton of knitting time in on the train, which allowed me to finish one of the finished objects that I have, which I will share in a bit. And it just allowed me to talk knitting for basically a whole day with somebody that is also learning. So I could also share a lot of information and my own experience and knowledge with her. So that was a great trip. I'm thinking I will maybe do that, you know, once every 6 months or at least once a year, because it's really nice to have somebody that I can see in person, but also just a friend that I could catch up with in that way, because it had been about 3 years since I saw her last. I kind of decided informally a bit that February was going to become a month for me where I really tried to clear a lot of things off my needles before really diving in and casting on anything new. One whip is maybe an exception to that because I really wanted a very tiny stockinette project I could work on. But for the most part, this month has really been all about trying to finish things. I still have a little bit of ways to go in the remaining weeks, but I have done my best to not start anything new, even though I'm dying to cast on a new garment. But the current projects I have really need some love and they need to be finished. So let's talk about my very first whip, let's talk about my very first finished object, which you can see here, and that is my Monday sweater. So this is by Petite Knit. This is knit top down. You do a 1x1 rib folded collar, which you then sew down or knit down, I guess, before moving on to the raglan increases. And you can see this 3-stitch raglan detail here. So this was a really nice, easy knit, stockinette, raglan increases, very basic sweater, but really, really nicely fitting. I'm gonna get into the details of this. So I knit a size small, and on this pattern, you are meant to have 15 to 20 centimeters of positive ease. So the final blocked measurement should be around 110 centimeters bust circumference, 58 centimeters length. I did swatch for this project and I got gauge, I double checked it, and that was without any crazy stretching. But, you know, before blocking, my measurements were 96 centimeter bust and 54 centimeters length. And after blocking, I had 104 centimeters bust and 54 centimeters length. So I didn't really gain anything in length after blocking. And I did gain about 10 centimeters around the bust, but I didn't end up at that final size small measurement. So in the end, I still ended up similar to my Salty Days sweater, closer to the extra small sizing, which is around 105 centimeters. And I'm not really sure why that happened, because I did double check also my final block garment, and my gauge is the recommended 21 stitches, but I did notice I didn't get the full row gauge. Yeah, row gauge. I had 28 stitches instead of 30. So there is something off there, which is maybe impacting more the length of the garment. But with petite knit, because she usually just always says to knit to a certain length before you start ribbing or the bottom, I'm still not exactly sure what happened there. However, I am really happy with the length of the sweater. I prefer kind of this crop look. I think it goes with everything, especially I've been wearing this with a skirt quite a bit, and it's the perfect length for that. Where I'm noticing the length doesn't work as well as on the sleeves. So I do kind of wish that it was a bit more, sitting above kind of that wrist bone there. And it's not really doing that. I have asked a few people in my life if it looks okay or too small, and everybody says they think it looks great. I could have definitely avoided this, because when I was working the sleeves, I knit the entire ribbing to the recommended amount, and then I actually just, rather than casting off and then starting the next sleeve, I decided to put the stitches on hold on try-on tubing, complete the other sleeve, do the same there, and then I washed and blocked it, and then did the bind off. So I added, I think, 2 extra rows after the blocking, but I probably could have gotten away with more. And I think part of the reason I'm not getting as much length on this is I did decide to drain and spin after blocking within my washing machine, and that takes out so much water that I'm finding when I go to block, so put it on the blocking mat, stretch it out, I think I'm not getting quite as much leeway in the piece to be able to stretch it to the final measurements. I might be crazy there, maybe that's all in my head. Let me know your thoughts, but I'm thinking maybe if I block this again and then either don't do drain and spin or do it for less time, maybe I'll be able to get a little bit more length out of the sleeves at least, and maybe even the body, although in the end, my bust is around 89 centimeters. I still ended up with about 15 centimeters positive ease, which is, you know, within the recommended 15 to 20. And I think for my size, this circumference actually works pretty well. So I'm not that bothered by that. But I would like to see a little bit more length come out of the sleeve. So I'm trying to decide if I want to do that again. If not, maybe eventually. I have quite a lot of yarn left. I think I have about half a skein of this Jelholtz Utspinderi Dansbesold 8-2 in the color copper. And I still have an entire ball of the Knitting for Olive Mohair in claret. So, you know, if I decide at some point I do want to go back in and adjust the length, I definitely can do that. But I think for now, I'm pretty happy wearing it. It's been off the blocking mats for just over a week, and I've already worn it 3 times. So really, really happy with this sweater, and I'm especially happy with the color. I am so in love with this color, especially on my skin tone. I think it was a great decision. So yeah, definitely recommend the Monday sweater. Pattern was really, really clear, easy to understand, and I think maybe in the future I'd make this again or something very similar to it. Another thing that I'm trying to include a bit more with finished objects is the total price of the project. So I spent 38 euros on the Jelholtz yarn and 48 euros on the mohair. So that brings the total project cost to 86 euros, which For this quality of sweater and also this quality of yarn, I think that is more than reasonable. It's definitely not the most expensive project I've ever made. And I think I would use both. Well, I use the mohair on everything, so definitely I would use that again. But also I was really worried about this Danspasol being too itchy. And I'm really happy with it. I'm not wearing anything under this right now, and I don't have any issues with it on my skin. So it does feel a bit more rustic when you're working with it, but overall, totally fine. And I think for the cost, not as bad as I originally remembered it being. So definitely recommend both of those. The other thing I wanted to talk about is I had said in my last video for the ribbing on the sleeves, I was planning to try DPN needles, so double pointed needles, instead of using magic loop to see if I could avoid that laddering, but also see if I enjoyed the experience a bit more. Overall thoughts on DPNs, I'm not sure I actually enjoy the experience more than magic loop. I think they are both challenging in their own ways. With DPNs, you definitely have longer needles, and I find I tend to knit in a pretty baggy sweatshirt at night. And as I was knitting, the DPN kept getting caught up in my sleeve, so I had to keep rolling my sleeves up to try to avoid that. So it was a little bit finicky. But where I found DPNs actually worked a lot better is to avoid the laddering that inevitably would still happen also with DPNs. I would always knit 2 of the stitches onto the last needle before switching to that 5th needle to use. So this way I was never having the same join point. It was always moving on every single needle on every single round. I hope I'm explaining that okay. So that really was much easier than magic loop, where you kind of have to like keep adjusting, pulling the cord out, fixing your stitches on the needle. With DPNs, that was really easy. You just knit 2 stitches, then change your needle, finish, knit the next 2 stitches from the next needle onto the same one you were just using, then switch needle, so on and so forth. So that was definitely better with the DPNs. I think for sleeves, it's definitely something I would continue doing. And thankfully on this piece, I was able to get all the way to the ribbing without having to use DPN. So it was just that final 12 centimeters, which still feels like it goes on forever because it's ribbing. But yeah, I think I would still use DPNs for that part in the future, and maybe also just smaller circumference knitting. Like I'm gonna try to pick up, I think, those Sunday socks I still have lingering on my needles, just the final portion. See if using DPNs helps me kind of power through that and get it done quick. And then maybe make some final calls on those. I do think though, a few people mentioned on my last video that they use the Chow shorty needles. So they're the shorter tips and cord, and they don't really find too much wrist discomfort using those, and they really recommend them. And definitely my preference is when I can continue to knit in the round, I would prefer to do that. When I tried on really small needles, like 2.5 millimeters for socks, I found that a very unpleasant experience. It was really hard on my hands. But maybe with 3.5 and above, and this circumference still being quite wide, I think that could be a better experience for me. It would definitely be my preference. So I think on the next project I have, where I do need to switch down to magic loop or DPNs for sleeves or a neckline, maybe I will just buy the shorties in a size I use all the time, like 3.5 or 4 millimeter needles, and give that a shot and see how I like it. Because I think that would be my go-to if I had a preference. But I think small circumference knitting in general is just, it's very personal for how you prefer to do it, and it's always going to be a little bit painful and challenging. So you just have to find the one that causes you the least amount of pain. And I'm not there yet, but slowly making progress. DPNs, like I said, no laddering, easier to kind of work in the round, but every once in a while needles will get stuck pointing into the wrong thing. So not my favorite there. So in general, that is, I think, all my thoughts on the Monday sweater. Really, really happy with it. We'll wear it all the time. For the most part, I didn't really have any issues knitting this. I did somehow in the sleeve drop a stitch somewhere, which I then just corrected in the ribbing. I think I also had a bit of an issue on my final bind off, but honestly, especially with this yarn, nothing that's noticeable. I haven't been able to locate those mistakes again. Nobody else is gonna notice them. So let's just pretend they never happened and move on. Then my second and finished object. So like I said, this has been on my needles for a solid 15 months. I double checked my Ravelry. I cast it on November 15th, 2022, and I cast off Monday. So I think that was February 18th. I do have a little bit of final finishing touches, but I'm gonna count this as a finished object because I could wear it exactly as it is, but I do plan to add buttons. And if you'll recall back, if you've been here for a very long time, I had mentioned in my very first podcast ever that this was a project I had been considering frogging because it had been sitting there so long. I wasn't sure I really wanted the final piece. I was hating the process of knitting it. And people were outraged in a good way, saying, no, I needed to just keep going, finish it. It was beautiful. So the finished object is my Cardigan No4 by My Favourite Things Knitwear. Now, this is a half fisherman's rib cardigan, which you originally cast on the neckline here. So you knit this strip. So coming out, this is your cast on point. You do a provisional cast on, you work your way out, and then you pick up stitches along the edge and then work your way out. I remember having so many challenges and having to recast on that strip there to start, I think 3 or 4 times. It's still not very clean. I think hopefully I would be a little bit better at doing that now with, you know, another whole year and a bit of experience, but maybe not. The reason this took me so long is because I really hated the process of knitting it. The way that this is done, so half fisherman's rib in general is a stitch that just grows at half the speed of a normal stockinette project or rib project, because for every 2 rounds, you are basically knitting 1. And that's because you're knitting into the row below. And then in addition for this button band is knit at the same time as you are doing the body. So that means you're working on 1 size needle, so 6mm for the half fisherman's rib, at the same time that you're using double pointed needles to knit on 4.5mm for the button band, which is a 1x1 rib. So it's very hard to get into a rhythm. Not only are you not knitting in the round, but you're knitting a more complex stitch, and then you're fiddling with 2 needles on every single round of the body. So that took me the bulk of time, and then I figured, okay, once I was finally done the body, I would just blow right through the rest. And I think in general, I thought, oh, 6mm needles on this project, it's gonna be a breeze. I'm gonna have this done in a month. And then when I started it, I was like, okay, yeah, I really hate working on this. I don't really have any desire to keep going, but finally finished the body. I think in my first podcast, the body was finally done, and then I had just been putting off doing the sleeves, or I think I was halfway through. And in the end, I'm not really sure why it took so long to do the sleeves, because, you know, I cast them on last Thursday, so my final sleeve, and I worked on it on the train to Middleburg, and then worked on it on the way back. So I spent about a day and a half total working on that sleeve to finish it. So I easily could have had this done months and months and months ago, but I just wasn't really craving the final piece. And I would still say, you know, I'm gonna insert proper B-roll because this is hard to see. So I would say I'm still not really desiring the final piece here. The color overall is not my favorite. It's very fluffy and big and oversized, which doesn't tend to be a style I really wear a lot. And I just don't personally have a ton of use for fancy cardigans. So yeah, I think I'll wear it time to time, but I'm not super enthused about it. I also noticed that in general, I just have so I only own 3 cardigans, including this one. And somehow I've ended up with all of them being exactly the same color. So let me get them. Okay, I'm back. So this was my first cardigan, oh, backwards, which is store-bought. I just bought this, I think, for our trip to Greece, so I had something to wear. So white, ribbing, basic. Then I cast on this one, cardigan number 4. So yeah, I don't think I intentionally picked those to be the same, but I'd already bought the yarn. So this is also knitting for Olive Putty, held with Pearl Grey Mohair, and then held with the Ladybug Yarn Mohair in Mist, so it's a bit more variegated. So I think I just had the mist yarn. I wanted to use it for something. I bought it on a whim, decided I love this cardigan, bought the rest of the mohairs, and ended up with that color without really putting the 2 of those together. And then last year I made my Cardi jumper by VertKnit. Also, I was expecting this to be a bit more beige in the end, because the putty looked like it would be in photos. And then obviously it wasn't, it was more white. So yeah, somehow I've ended up with 3 cardigans in nearly identical colors, and all colors that I don't really love for myself. So next time I make one, I'm definitely making gray or brown, some other color that is not an off-white. So please hold me accountable to that. And other things on the cardigan number 4, so I knit a size small for that, and total cost without buttons right now is 126 euros, which I think is one of the most expensive projects I've knit in the last year or so. So definitely up there. I don't know if it's necessarily, based on the fact I said I probably won't wear it that much. I think it's not necessarily the best use of money, but what really drove the cost up on that was the mohair. I can't remember exactly how much it was, but I think it was around 30 euros per skein. So 60 euros total in just mohair. And actually I have a whole other skein that I haven't even used. So I spent 90 euros in total on mohair, and now I have this extra ball that I need to use for something. So yeah, it's one of those projects where the yarn quality is really good, but it's not really in a piece that I love and will probably wear a lot. And then I will also have the additional cost of buttons. So I did talk about originally that I didn't know if I was going to add buttons to this piece, but I think it will really finish off the overall look. And I've mentioned before, I'm not super happy with kind of the laddering and that happened on the one side. I messed up stitches somewhere, which then I think I dropped a stitch or I did an increase wrong, and it just changed that whole side. I did manage to block it out a little bit, but it's not perfect. So I do definitely want to add buttons to try to hopefully cover that. So I think I'll put the buttons on the left side so that the button band covers that laddering side. I'm thinking maybe a matte black button. I don't want anything too fancy, but I also don't want to just order online and hope for the best. So I think Saturday I am going to go to a local fabric store. There's actually one right next to Stephen and Penelope that I have walked past before. They have a ton of button selection. I think I'm going to stop by there and just, you know, play around, hold different ones up, see what is speaking to me, and then buy the 4 buttons for that and finish it. So you will see that come back in a future episode once I have properly finished it. But I felt it was such a big achievement, and it's been sitting there for so long on and off my needles that I just really wanted to show it with you all today, and let's consider it a finished object. Oh, the other thing on this piece, oh, I haven't weaved an end in. I had said, I think when I finished the first sleeve a few podcasts ago, that I was working on it late at night, and I had read the instructions for the cuff decreases. So you do like a rapid decrease here by knitting 2 together. And I could not understand how that was written. It was just, it sounded like gibberish. I read it so many times. I was like, knit as if in pattern for fisherman's rib, and you like knit the 1 stitch over, and then it said, oh, and then just work into the first stitch as normal, which made no sense because how are you supposed to twist your needle around to do that? So I opted to just do knit 2 together all the way across, which you can see has created like a really weird line here. But I decided I didn't really care at that point. And then while I was on the train on the way home, I reread it and suddenly it clicked. I actually got what the pattern was saying, and I've worked in half fisherman's rib before, so I was like, oh, of course, just look up a video on how to do decreases for half fisherman's rib, and I found a video from Andrea Mowry, which I'll link to if I remember. It's in my Ravelry project notes if I don't remember. And when you do it in pattern, it looks much better. So original, and then the actual final one. So I decided nobody's going to be looking closely at my wrists to even notice that. So I'm not going to go back and correct it on the first sleeve. I'll just live with that. It's a design detail. But I was very proud of myself for finally understanding what the pattern was asking me to do. And definitely it looks much clearer. So I left that note and the video in my Ravelry project. So if you're also struggling with that specific cardigan with those decreases, you can just go there and read the instructions that I give. Okay, so those are my 2 finished objects. Now let's move into the works in progress. One of my main projects that I've been focusing on this month is my blouse number 2 for My Favorite Things Knitwear. And that is because, if you're not aware, I am hosting a knit along. So it's the hashtag Finish That Blouse Cal over on Instagram. And we are doing any blouse from My Favorite Things Knitwear. So that could be blouse 1 light, or blouse number 2. And we got a bit of a group chat going, which has been really active, and it's been nice to see everybody's progress. Most people are knitting blouse 1, but I had already started last year blouse 2, and this is the progress that I've made. So so there is the progress keeper that I had put on last time, and you can see that I made quite a bit of progress. So around 8 of the repeats of the 8-row pattern. I'm knitting this in drops, extra fine, drops cotton merino, I believe, Pima cotton. Okay, always double check what you're knitting with before you start filming. I'm knitting this in the drops cotton merino in color 8, which is this kind of marine navy blue. And I did this because I didn't want to spend the money on the Rama Petunia. I was also having difficulties finding it. So yeah, this has been a good yarn. I do find knitting with cotton, it's very splitty. It's not the most enjoyable experience. And in general, I haven't knit with cotton in many years. I used to make tank tops and baby blankets out of it all the time, but I forgot just how heavy this thing actually is. So I'm hoping with blocking, maybe it'll feel a little bit more comfortable, but this is really becoming a heavy piece. You can also see with this pattern, it's not the most like visually appealing before blocking, but then once it's actually blocked, it will start to open up and really stretch. So I'm very excited to see what that will look like in the end. So that is blouse number 2, making really good progress. I believe I measured yesterday. I want to say I'm 2 centimeters away from finishing the body, and I don't expect that's going to take me very long. So the cal is running technically until the end of March, so you have plenty of time to join still if you decide to. You don't need to actually finish your project. You can just post your whip photos as well and be entered for one of the 3 prizes. But I do expect I will definitely be done my blouse before then, and I'm just really hoping that I like it. I think as I'm working on it, maybe it's just because of the yarn and the heaviness of it, I'm wondering how practical of a piece it's actually going to be. And I think also with cotton, as I've been working with it, I remember like the second the threads start to pull apart, it can just look a little bit sloppy and it snags really easy. So I'm not sure how the piece will actually hold up long term either. But it is an enjoyable knit, and I've really, when I started again a couple weeks ago, it took me a while to get back into the pattern rhythm. I was making a lot of really stupid mistakes. Now that I'm working on it kind of every day, a little bit at a time, I have really memorized the 8 pattern repeat. I just have the counter app on my phone going. I put a few notes in there because I think the hard part is it's not just the 8 pattern repeat, it's also to create this side seam. So this side seam, which is a nice little design detail. To create that, you need to do 1 round, so all your odd rows have an increase on either side of a stitch marker, and then on the even rows you decrease those. So that's creating that nice little definition, which is great, but then it means you really need to know, are you on an odd or even row, and does that mean increase or decrease? Then the next whip that I have been dedicating a lot of time to is my Berlin scarf. So this is by Paula Strick, or Suzanne Muller on Ravelry. And last time I showed you, I was way up here, so it's hard to show. So I had done about half, and then I have since, done all of this, and I've actually started on the fringe. So somehow when I started the fringe, I was actually 2 stitches short. So when I did the decrease rounds before you put everything onto a single needle, I had to change the number of decreases I did to end up with the correct number of stitches. And then since I know my scarf overall is shorter and I'm working on smaller needles than the pattern called for, I decided to do the fringe a little bit shorter. So it calls for 18 centimeters in the pattern. I think I did mine around 15. And I'm just slowly working my way through. So these are not the most fun to knit. I think there are 9 or 10 total per side, so I'm roughly halfway through. It's kind of been the thing I just throw on my needles every few days. At the end of the day, do a fringe here, a fringe there. And I am planning to finish this before the end of the month. So this is one of those whips that I just want to get off my needles before I start something else, also so I can actually wear it in the winter. I am knitting it in the drops brushed alpaca in beige. I really like this yarn. It's definitely way more affordable than the called for Sadness Garn alpaca borset, I believe. And I also saw in people's projects that if you don't want to hold this double, you could also knit in the Drops Melody, which is also brushed alpaca, but slightly thicker. So then you can just do a single strand, and that is closer to the original called for yarn and still very affordable. So that's a suggestion for you if you're interested in that. The other thing I want to mention with this scarf is Amy from Knee Knits also kicked off a scarf cowl. So that is the fluffy scarf cowl, which I can't remember exactly when it's running to. I think it's also mid-March or late March, and you can enter with whips or finished objects. You can knit any scarf as long as it's fluffy, and it is sponsored by Originally Lovely Yarn, which is a brand that she's partnered with. So I know she's also knitting the Berlin scarf, but in a Originally Lovely yarn. And yeah, so if you have been thinking about getting a scarf done for the season, then I recommend the Berlin scarf highly. I really love the look of this, but go ahead and join the fluffy scarf cowl to also be entered to win those prizes. So lots of cowls going on right now. That brings me to the final whip that I have, and this is the brand new one, which is another Oslo Hat. I told myself in my winter knitting plans that I would try to make something other than the Oslo Hat, but the thing is, it's just such a nice fitting hat and it's easy, and I basically have that pattern memorized at this point, so I don't need to think about it. I know exactly how to do everything in it, and I know I can finish it quite quickly. So I cast this on, I think also last Wednesday, because I was originally supposed to go to a knitting event on Valentine's Day, and I opted not to because it was raining and I had been busy with work, so I didn't want to go out. But I cast this on so that I could work on it at that Knit and Note event, because it was supposed to be in a dark movie theater, and I figured, okay, if I don't do stockinette, I have no chance of actually being able to work on any of my current whips. So I cast it on for that purpose, but also because I have the last remaining bits of this, what is it called? Olivia and Oliver Fibers Classic Stock Luau yarn. So I had my final 87 grams of this, and I had made an Oslo hat for this, held with the Filcolana Tilia in light truffle. And I made it for my sister-in-law for Christmas when I went to Jasper. And I really love the way it turned out, especially I typically knit myself a small in the Oslo Hat, but I'm really finding I don't actually like how tight those sit on me. So I wanted to knit a medium because I love the way that hers turned out. And I find this yarn held with that specific mohair color just like has such a nice subtle look with the specks. Like, it's not super variegated and like screaming that there's color in this thing. So I think it still goes with everything. It's neutral enough. So I really wanted one for myself. I decided to cast it on, just get it done this season. And then I think when I'm done this, I'm just saying no more hats for the season. Maybe I'll cast on one more. I definitely have lots of yarn for hats, but I think I'm ready to move on to maybe the Cargill cowl that I had from Creabea. I bought an extra ball of mohair for that, which the dye lot is completely different than the original that I have, but it's fine. And I also really want to make a pair of penny gloves. I have the yarn for that. I've been saying I'm going to knit those for the last 2 seasons. I have no gloves that I've knit for myself. So I think that's going to be the last small accessory I make for the winter season, and then move on to summer knitting. So I have roughly 10 centimeters left in this top portion, and then I am ready to move on to the decreases. This is also the most clean join I've ever done on an Oslo Hat, which I will say the first attempt at it was horrible. I kept messing up, and then I got to the last section last quarter and realized, oh, I'm super far off on my stitches, so I had to rip back everything, which was really hard on the hands on 3mm needles. But then I went back and did it again, and I was perfect one-to-one stitch. So really happy with how this joined together. I think it's going to be absolutely beautiful and probably my most worn hat in the end. And I've got it in my Statement Junkie hedgehog project bag that I bought in Canada when I was there. So yeah, I think that's going to be done this weekend and probably a finished object for the next video. Other than that, no progress on my cami number 9. I do think, you know, in the spirit of trying to get stuff off my needles, I am mentally trying to prepare myself that this weekend I am just going to sit down and power through that one. Even if I don't do all the final finishing details, I'd at least like to get one armband and the neckband done. And then maybe the weekend after, do the rip out of the other armhole that I done, and then tack everything down. So that's definitely going to extend into March, but I think I just need to put my head down and do it. I did bring it on the train to Middelburg with the intention of using those 3 hours there or back to do it. And then I just wasn't feeling it. I was so close to finishing the cardigan that I decided to just put all my focus there. Also, while I was working on, is general comment, while I was working on my Berlin scarf, I had an issue with one of the fringe where the I-cord was really, really tight, and I thought I'd messed up and I would need to rip it back out. And then I realized I was carrying up a little thread within that column, and the second I dropped it, the whole I-cord just untwisted and loosened up. And that was actually perfect to learn that, because I think if we go back to my turtle dove shawl from Sari Nordland that I had been working on at Christmas, I said I had this really tight bit here and I could not figure out what was happening. It's something in the I-cord. I have the right number of stitches. I don't know what I did. And having that experience on my Berlin scarf, I think I've realized exactly what's going on. So I plan to record a video. The light here has been really bad, which is why I actually didn't start this back up, because I want to make sure that I record it so I can share it with you guys. And it could also be that that's not actually the issue, but it feels exactly the same. So I'm thinking if I put it back on my needles, I will probably find some little thread within that I-cord edge that is causing it to be so tight. And maybe if I drop that little thread, the whole thing will loosen up and I can finally finish this piece. If that is not the case and it doesn't happen, I think I've decided I'm just gonna rip this whole thing out and restart it next season if I'm still feeling it, because I don't want it just lingering on my needles. And this yarn is so beautiful. It's the Gepard yarn, sorry, it's all tangled. Gepard yarn Woolen Soft in Eggplant, held with knitting for Olive soft silk mohair. And I just, you know, I either want it to be turned into something else that I will wear or start it again as a shawl. But yeah, I think I have better luck of just starting this shawl over again next winter than I do of trying to go back and actually fix it. So, you know, pulling out the stitches and then putting it back on my needle halfway down, I don't see myself really doing that. I'm sure other people would, but yeah, it's been sitting there for a reason, right? Like I haven't had the energy to do that or the motivation, so better to just rip back and start over. The other final point is I talked last video about, that was a very Canadian about, every once in a while I really hear it. I talked about doing the Melides dress, hopefully in time for a trip that I'm taking to Sicily at the end of May. And I bought the pattern, which was 18 euros, downloaded it, was all excited to do my swatch. Open that thing, it's 39 pages, and it is the most detailed, intricate pattern I've personally ever read. I mean, kudos to Vertknit. It is so well written. I don't know if she has like a tailoring seamstress background, but wow, like that dress, when she says it's made to measure, it truly is. There's all these measurements you need to do to even like figure out how much yarn you need, exactly how your gauge will be. So I was a little bit intimidated. I decided to just put that aside for a second, finish the rest of these projects. But I do think it's a challenge that I really want to take on. Based on all the feedback from the last video, I think I'm gonna go for the petroleum blue color. It's the one I was leaning to, and it's the one that got the most feedback. And I think it is neutral enough to go with everything, but still a little bit exciting. I don't know if I am going to be capable of modifying this pattern to actually be worked in the round. So I may just knit it as it's instructed, which is flat, and then you do the buttons. We'll see. But I do think it's something I want to take on. I really love the look of that piece. Her patterns are so well done. So I really could use a knitting buddy for motivation on that one. So if you have any intention of knitting it and you want to knit it along with me, let me know. We can do a bit of a group chat and share experiences and questions, because I know I'm going to have a lot and I don't want to be bombarding Ines with it. But yeah, I think if I decide to actually knit that, which I probably will, I may do a vlog series on it, because I think that's going to be a really good learning experience, and maybe also encourage some other people to take on the challenge. Or maybe I'll scare you all too much to ever attempt it. But let's see how it goes. So that is, you know, a tentative project for March that I'm considering once some of these other things are done. That, I think, is it for now. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please go ahead, like, comment. I really appreciate any of that support. Also, don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications. I do try to post podcast episodes around I would say I'm most consistent with every 3 weeks right now, typically on a Monday. And I am trying to be better about also adding in additional video content throughout the month. February has been a little bit slow because I've been quite busy with life, and I took on a little bit too much in January, which I'm planning to do a knit and chat video with a bigger update on that. But yeah, so I am planning to post more content, especially around, you know, for more beginner knitters who are just looking for general guidance on things and tips and tricks that I have, learnings that I've got from the community. So if you especially are kind of just getting started with knitting and that seems relevant, then definitely please subscribe. Also follow me on Instagram, and I look forward to seeing you in future episodes.